More than a century after the Titanic sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, scientists are still discovering new things inside the wreck. When researchers first located the ship in 1985, many believed it would remain relatively stable for hundreds of years. But recent deep-sea surveys show that the wreck is changing much faster than expected. Entire sections of the ship are weakening, steel structures are collapsing, and some of the most recognizable parts of the Titanic have already disappeared. But the ship itself is only part of the story. The ocean floor around the Titanic has become one of the most unusual underwater archaeological sites ever discovered. When the ship broke apart during the sinking in 1912, thousands of objects were scattered across the seabed as the bow and stern sections descended. Today, that debris field stretches across several square kilometers and contains more than 5,000 documented artifacts from the ship and its passengers. Over the past few decades, robotic submarines and deep-sea expeditions have recorded thousands of personal items that once belonged to people on board. Some of the most striking discoveries include luggage, jewelry, watches, shoes, and personal belongings that remained preserved in the cold, dark waters of the deep Atlantic. Leather suitcases have been found still closed, protecting clothing and documents inside. In several cases, even paper labels and fabric patterns were still visible after more than 100 years underwater. One particularly well-known artifact is a gold pocket watch recovered from a passenger. The watch had stopped at 2:28 in the morning, only minutes after the Titanic disappeared beneath the surface. Several similar watches have been found over the years, giving historians a clearer idea of the timeline during the ship's final moments. Jewelry has also been recovered from the wreck site. Expeditions have found diamond rings, gold necklaces, brooches, and other valuables that once belonged to first-class passengers. Some of these items were later matched to passenger records and family archives, allowing historians to identify the original owners. Researchers have also discovered sealed bottles among the wreckage. Several wine bottles recovered from the debris field were still intact after more than a century on the ocean floor. The corks remained sealed because of the enormous water pressure at that depth. Not all discoveries are glamorous, though. Scientists have also found everyday objects that give a more personal look at life aboard the Titanic. These include shaving kits, perfume bottles, eyeglasses, combs, shoes, and even unopened tins of food. In many places, the organic materials have decomposed, but the objects themselves remained in place on the seabed. One of the most haunting discoveries made during early expeditions involved pairs of shoes lying next to each other on the ocean floor. Researchers believe these shoes mark locations where passengers likely came to rest after the sinking. Over time, the bodies decomposed, leaving only the footwear behind. All of these artifacts help historians better understand what life was like aboard the ship during its final voyage. But while these objects remain scattered across the seabed, the wreck itself is slowly disappearing. To understand why, it helps to look at the extreme environment where the Titanic lies today. The wreck sits nearly 3,800 meters below the surface of the North Atlantic Ocean. At that depth, the pressure is more than 380 times higher than at sea level, and temperatures usually stay between 1 and 2 degrees Celsius. Sunlight never reaches the ocean floor, and the entire area is covered in permanent darkness. When scientists first discovered the wreck in 1985, the bow of the ship still looked surprisingly recognizable. Railings were still standing. Deck structures were visible. Some openings even allowed small submersibles to look inside parts of the ship. But later expeditions began to notice something unusual growing across the surface of the metal. Long rust formations were hanging from railings, portholes, and broken beams all across the wreck. At first glance, they looked like ordinary corrosion. But when scientists examined them closely, They realized these structures were actually created by living microorganisms. Researchers call these formations rusticles. Rusticles are produced by colonies of bacteria that survive by feeding on iron. The microbes attach themselves to the steel surfaces of the ship and slowly break down the metal. As they consume iron, they form long rust structures that grow outward from the wreck. Some rusticles can reach nearly a meter in length and hang from the ship like underwater stalactites. Despite their solid appearance, rusticles are extremely fragile. If touched by a robotic arm or submersible, they crumble instantly into reddish dust. That dust is essentially the remains of the ship itself. The bacteria convert solid steel into rust particles that eventually fall away and disperse across the seabed. Researchers estimate that microbial activity may remove hundreds of kilograms of metal from the wreck every year. Over time, this weakens the structural supports that once held entire sections of the ship together. As the metal becomes thinner and more brittle, parts of the wreck begin collapsing under their own weight. This process has already changed several well-known areas of the Titanic. Sections of the deck have fallen inward, railings have broken away, and parts of the interior have collapsed completely. One famous feature, the captain's bathtub in the officers' quarters, was clearly visible in earlier expeditions, but has since disappeared as the surrounding structure deteriorated. Rusticles are not the only force damaging the ship. Saltwater corrosion continues to attack exposed metal surfaces. Deep-sea currents move sediment across the wreck. Certain marine organisms slowly burrow into weakened materials. Even the enormous water pressure at that depth puts constant stress on structures that are already fragile. Because of all these factors, scientists now believe the Titanic is in an advanced stage of decay. Some researchers estimate that large portions of the visible structure could collapse within the next few decades. Eventually, the wreck may flatten into a low pile of rust and debris scattered across the ocean floor. Even as the ship slowly disappears, it continues to provide valuable scientific information. Modern expeditions now use high-resolution sonar mapping and remotely operated vehicles to document the wreck in incredible detail. These surveys allow researchers to track how the ship changes over time and preserve digital records of areas that may soon collapse. Detailed mapping of the debris field has also helped scientists understand how the Titanic actually broke apart during its sinking in 1912. Earlier theories suggested the ship split cleanly in two near the ocean surface. But modern surveys show the breakup was far more complex, with different sections of the hull failing at different stages as the ship descended. More than 110 years after the disaster, the Titanic remains one of the most studied shipwrecks in history. What scientists are learning from it goes far beyond the story of the sinking itself. The wreck has become an important laboratory for studying deep-sea microbes, corrosion, and how large metal structures break down in extreme environments. In a strange way, the Titanic is still changing and still teaching researchers new things. But the clock is ticking. The same microorganisms that are quietly consuming the ship today will eventually erase much of what remains. Over time, the massive ocean liner that once carried more than 2,200 passengers across the Atlantic may slowly disappear, leaving only scattered artifacts and scientific records of the wreck that once rested in the darkness of the deep ocean.
New exclusive photographs, by far the best yet, are in from the Titanic. For most of this century,
When the first images of the Titanic shipwreck appeared in September 1985, the world stopped. People were glued to their TVs, watching the legendary ship reappear after more than 70 years. Where did the Titanic sink, you ask? It's located about 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. This so-called unsinkable ship rests in complete darkness, about 12,600 feet below the surface. Yep, that's how deep the Titanic is. But even after such a long fall down to the ocean floor, the front part, known as the bow, still looks surprisingly intact. I mean, the railings were still there, the anchor chains too, even the elegant curves of the hull you might recognize from old photos. But the news barely mentioned the stern back then, and there's a reason we still don't talk much about it. You see, these images were about more than just capturing mesmerizing and eerie footage. They were proof of what really happened when the Titanic sank. We were finally getting some answers about this 1912 disaster, when more than 1,600 people lost their lives. And before you Google how many people survived the Titanic, I'll tell you, 706. Among those survivors, several claimed they saw the ship break apart as it went down. Others insisted it sank in one piece, and in the end, investigators agreed with them. Back then, official reports concluded that Titanic had gone down intact. So, for 73 years, that was the official story, until we finally saw the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean. When the Titanic underwater photos were released, they confirmed it. Yes, the liner really did break apart as it sank. And if we've just seen those images of the bow, that means the stern must be around there too, right? Well, kind of. I mean, we did find it. It's located about 2,000 feet away from the bow, lying on the ocean floor. So yes, it exists. But why doesn't anyone ever talk about what happened to the stern of the Titanic? Well, there's a big reason for that. See, the bow, even after all the damage from hitting the seafloor, still looks recognizable. Many of its interiors are surprisingly well preserved, and it's lying as if the ship was continuing its voyage. But the stern is destroyed. Today it's more like a twisted tangle of steel that barely looks like a ship at all. Only the parts that are more resilient, like the propellers, reciprocating engines, and rudder, have managed to hold their shape. But the rest of the stern section is melting into the seafloor. Yet, to understand why it's in such a terrible state, we need to go back to that freezing night of April 15, 1912, the night of the Titanic wreck. Just hours before the tragedy, Titanic was still sailing smoothly across the cold North Atlantic. The stern was alive with people, families talking, music playing, life going on as usual. This is where the room for passengers with the cheapest tickets were located. That's why third-class travelers were also known as steerage passengers. But the stern wasn't only for passengers. It also contained many of the ship's storage areas, including cargo holds, baggage rooms, kitchens, crew quarters, and even the engineering spaces. And hold on to that info, it's going to be important in a second. So let's jump straight to when the liner struck the iceberg. As the bow began to sink, the stern slowly lifted out of the water, putting enormous strain on the middle of the ship. By around 2 in the morning, the lights on Titanic flickered and then went out. Moments later, the ship broke in two, and the bow disappeared beneath the waves. The stern briefly settled back on the water before rising again, this time almost vertical. It stayed upright for a few seconds and then began its final plunge. At about 2:20 in the morning, the stern vanished beneath the Atlantic. Titanic was gone. What was happening beneath the water were two completely different scenarios. First, the bow slowly filled with water and began to drift downward, almost sailing gently like a submarine. Because of that, it managed to keep its shape and stayed mostly intact. But Titanic's stern collapse was a whole different story. The stern was ripped wide open where the ship had split apart. Water rushed in through that open end at incredible speed. This sudden flooding made the stern plunge downward much faster than the bow. The rush of water created so much turbulence that pieces were ripped off and scattered all around the ocean floor. Now, remember what I said earlier about the spaces inside the stern? Those huge storage areas were wide open, and many of them contained air pockets. So when the stern section broke away, it still had compartments filled with trapped air. As it spun down into the depths, this increasing water pressure crushed those pockets one by one. The surrounding structure began to implode, scattering pieces of metal, furniture, statues, and passengers' belongings across the ocean floor. So many experts believe the immense water pressure made that section collapse as it sank, and that's why we can't see much of it today. And now you know the answer to the Titanic back section mystery. We don't talk about it much, simply because there's not much left to see. It's like the part of the Titanic story that's too broken or too painful to talk about openly. The side of the ship that truly feels lost. And sorry to say this, but that's the future of the bow, too. I mean, it won't be there forever. The iconic shape of the wreck is changing year after year, and not in a good way. The front part of the Titanic is deteriorating, and one day, it'll be entirely gone. Down on the seabed, the Titanic faces enormous pressure, nearly 390 times greater than at the surface. The good news is there aren't any air pockets left inside the ship, so big implosions won't happen again. But the bad news is that the ship's own weight is now helping to tear it apart. As those 52,000 tons of steel slowly settle into the ocean floor, they twist and pull on the hull. Submersible missions have already spotted large cracks running through the steel plates, and even the decks themselves are starting to cave in. And there's something else. The wreck might look cool and spooky today, but that actually comes from a thick layer of bacteria and microbes covering it. The problem is, they're slowly eating the Titanic. Yep, most of the corrosion happening down there is caused by bacteria, and this is gradually weakening the entire structure. Steel plates, beams, and supports are getting thinner every year. Scientists estimate that the ship is losing between 0.13 and 0.2 tons of iron every single day. Still, even at that rate, the wreck won't vanish overnight. Experts believe it could take up to 420 years for the liner to disappear completely. Until then, we'll keep watching this sad but natural process unfold. Parts of the ship have been falling apart little by little since the night when Titanic sank, and a lot has already changed since we started taking underwater photos, like the railing sections that have dropped and the ceiling in the captain's bathroom that's collapsed. That's why so many expeditions are now focused on capturing footage and detailed scans of the Titanic shipwreck, to preserve its memory before the ocean takes it all. It's our way of keeping the story alive, even as time and nature continue their quiet work. Maybe those hungry bacteria can take a break from their buffet, so that Titanic can rest in peace with many more years to come.
Titanic.
The Titanic.
The Titanic.
The Titanic.
Titanic.
The Titanic.
The Titanic.
Titanic.
The Titanic.
Congratulations! You can now forget everything you've seen in the movies or everything you've read in books and newspapers and heard from people. Now we have the most detailed and reliable study of the famous sunken ship. A large-scale Titanic 3D scan allows us to see in fine detail everything that happened during the disaster. And rest assured, there was a lot going on there that you've never heard of. Are you ready for Titanic new discoveries? Let's go! There's a fat chance, or a thin chance, take your pick, that there are no people here who haven't heard of what happened. But just in case, here's the quick backstory. On April 10, 1912, the giant cruise ship Titanic sailed from Southampton, England to New York City. 4 days later, the ship collided with an iceberg and sank in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. It was one of the most tragic and biggest disasters in the history of sea voyages. Since then, the wreck of the giant ship has been lying under a layer of icy water. For decades, people wanted to get this ship from the bottom many times, but they never fully tried. Passenger stories, documentaries, and books have given us a complete picture of what happened. But the only witness that can tell us about those tragic events is the ship itself. And some people decided to ask it about that night. A group of experts, oceanographers and cinematographers, recreated a virtual version of the events and showed it in the documentary Titanic: The Digital Resurrection. This is the most detailed digital reconstruction of how the Titanic sank ever made. To create it, specialists from the Magellan Company sent marine robots to the bottom where the ship lies at a depth of 12,500 feet. In such a place, all objects experience immense water pressure. To better understand how great it is, imagine the weight of a heavy barbell on your fingertip. Experienced divers with standard scuba gear can only swim at depths up to 130 feet and a little deeper. So it's a challenging, almost impossible mission to descend to such a depth and conduct research. It's dangerous for people. That's why the team of specialists sent robots there. Equipped with cameras for deep-sea surveys, they took more than 700,000 photos and videos in 4K resolution. They were collecting data for 3 weeks, exploring every part of the ship. Eventually, they had about 16 terabytes of data. Now, 1 terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes. Is that a lot? The largest game on PC, Microsoft Flight Simulator, weighs about a half a terabyte, and it has maps of the entire planet to create a realistic flight simulator. Still, this huge program weighs 32 times less than that Titanic scan. Imagine how detailed the model of the ship and the simulation of the disaster turned out to be. Moreover, the team combined all this information with the drawings of the ship. They calculated the speed of Titanic that night, its direction, its position, and the angle of impact with the iceberg. All of this was uploaded to supercomputers to create precise crash simulations. After that, specialists studied eyewitness reports, got consultations from historians and maritime experts, and then presented a detailed staging of the tragic night. Some things turned out to be different from what you know about them. For example, the iceberg didn't make a huge hole in the side of the ship. A Titanic wreckage scan shows that a piece of ice had struck a glancing blow and created several holes in the hull. Each of them was the size of an A4 sheet of paper. How could such minor damage destroy a giant ship? The problem was that those A4-sized punctures covered the entire length of the case. The Titanic's creators claimed that it was the most unsinkable ship in the world. However, its unsinkability lay in the fact that it could stay afloat even if 4 of its watertight compartments got flooded. But the collision with the iceberg led to the flooding of 6 of them. The iceberg had a mere 6.3 seconds of contact with the ship and still managed to sink it. The Titanic wreckage scan also showed a portal with a broken window. The iceberg probably crashed in there. This finding confirms the words of eyewitnesses that pieces of ice got into the cabins. Just imagine how frightening that was. You're sleeping peacefully in your bed, then you hear a loud crash, and a piece of iceberg falls into your cabin. And after that, absolute chaos begins. The researchers found out exactly how the ship had split in half. In the famous movie, we all saw how the back of the ship had risen above the water and then broken off. The ship indeed broke, but not as gently as we saw on the screen. Yeah, the scale of the disaster was terrible, but the reality was even worse. The ship wasn't just broken, it was torn in two. Wooden and metal parts of the ship, pipes, chunks of the hull, walls, everything was torn and bent. The first-class cabins were torn in two. Imagine the screeching of metal that sounded on that cold night. Researchers compared other Titanic facts versus the movie. One of them was a story about First Officer William Murdoch. In the movie, his character attacked passengers who were trying to board the boat. But in reality, everything happened differently. Titanic survivor Charles Lightoller said William Murdoch had drowned when he was trying to lower a lifeboat into the water. He didn't attack anybody, but still faced a tragic fate. There are no exact details, but high-resolution scans have confirmed this version. But one of the most impressive and heroic tales that happened on the Titanic occurred in the boiler room. With the help of robots, experts discovered that one of the boat's steam valves had been left open. This finding only confirms eyewitness stories that the engineers stayed in the boiler room for more than 2 hours after the collision with the icebergs. This group of brave people maintained a power supply until the very end. Why did they do it? Proper lighting on the Titanic helped people safely lower the boats onto the water. Electric power also made the Titanic visible to distant ships. Moreover, passengers reported that the Titanic's lights were on even when it was submerged underwater. The brave feat of the engineers helped save hundreds of passengers' lives. Who knows, perhaps further research of the ship will tell us more about other heroic actions of the passengers and crew members. Actions that will be worth making a movie about. In addition to studying the ship, the researchers also scanned the seabed around the wreckage, where not only parts of the Titanic, but also personal belongings of passengers, including gold coins, pocket watches, combs, shoes, and so on, were scattered. By the way, many of those items have been raised from the bottom and sold at various auctions. You can also see some artifacts from the ship in specialized museums. One of those is called Titanic Belfast and is located in Northern Ireland. It is open to the public. A digital replica of the ship not only shows us how the Titanic sank, but also literally saves the ship. The condition of the wreckage is getting worse every day. Gigantic pressure, cold temperature, water, and marine life, all of this is slowly destroying the vessel. Oh yeah, some companies that organize dive trips to the ship for tourists also pose a danger to the ship. It turns out that there are a lot of people who wanted to go down inside a submersible to the legendary wreck. As a result of some of these excursions, parts of the ship were damaged. Experts predict that within the next 40 years, the unlucky liner may disappear completely. Fortunately, the Titanic 3D scan has provided such a level of detail that you can imagine walking inside it. This means that the tragedy will never be forgotten. Of course, 10 videos like this one won't be enough to cover the full scope of the work that the filmmakers have done. Fortunately, the documentary, Titanic: The Digital Resurrection, is available for viewing. You can watch the movie and also study the 3D models of the ship. Who knows? Perhaps you can make new discoveries.
By April 1912, the Titanic was the most expensive and unsinkable ship in the world. These days, the sunken Titanic is associated with some of the most expensive expedition tours in the world. Despite the terrible tragedy, people have built profitable businesses using the famous ship, and these businesses can be very dangerous. The Titanic fell to the bottom of the icy waters of the North Atlantic in 1912. It was more than 70 years before people finally discovered the ship. It happened in the 80s, when researcher Robert Ballard carried out a secret mission to search for sunken submarines. In addition to his mission, Ballard also wanted to search for the wreckage of the Titanic if he had the time. In short, he did find the Titanic. This discovery became the beginning of big profits, fighting for customers, lawsuits, and the destruction of the wreckage. Shortly after the discovery, Ballard came to the U.S. Congress and testified about the Titanic he'd found. He suggested making a sea memorial out of the wreck's site and leaving this place untouched. In 1986, Ballard installed a plaque on the Titanic, and the story ended there. But not for long. The Titanic tragedy was a popular theme, so many companies realized they could make a lot of money out of it. In 1987, an American company, Titanic Ventures, descended to the wreckage together with the French National Institute of Oceanography and got about 1,800 artifacts from there. Then the company received the rights from the US government to rescue the Titanic by parts. Over the course of several years, they made several other expeditions and took more than 2,000 artifacts. The company created a museum where it exhibited the found jewelry, interior elements, personal belongings of passengers, and a lot more. Some artifacts were put up for auction. The company made good profits and inspired many others to do the same. For example, let's take a look at this pocket watch. It belonged to a guy named Edmund Stone, who was a first-class steward. The watch stopped at 2:15 a.m. when it fell into the icy ocean water. After almost 100 years, it was sold for 130,000 euros, which is about $135,000, and is far from the highest price. Another item is the Titanic's ship plan. This is one of the most authentic artifacts from the ship, and it had a practical use. Experts used this blueprint to investigate the wreckage. It helped them understand where the iceberg had struck the Titanic. This plan was sold at auction for $320,000. Do you remember that moment in the movie when the ship began to sink and the violinists started playing their last song? It was actually true. There were real musicians on board who were playing till the end. One of them was Wallace Hartley. Unfortunately, he didn't survive the disaster, but his violin did. Even though it's impossible to play it, it was sold for $1.5 million. In general, as you understand, the hunt for the Titanic's artifacts turned out to be quite profitable. Then, director James Cameron came down to the Titanic. In 1997, he released his famous movie with the same name, and the popularity of the Titanic soared. Collecting the artifacts was no longer so interesting. People wanted to go down to the famous ship on their own. The high demand provided a good supply. In 1998, British company Deep Ocean Expeditions organized tours to the Titanic for only $32,500. From that time until 2012, the company conducted 197 dives to the wreckage of the ship, and during this time, the ticket price doubled. The company Titanic Ventures, which was the first to get an artifact from the sunken ship, later received the name RMS Titanic Inc., and it sued Deep Ocean Expeditions because it believed that its exclusive rights to salvage the ship's artifacts prevented other companies from conducting underwater tours. RMS Titanic won the court case and banned Deep Ocean from conducting expeditions, but this decision was overturned in 1999. In short, litigation and fights between competitors began. People continued to go down to the seabed to see the legendary ship. There were other companies that organized their own tours. Tourists descended to the Titanic inside underwater bathyscaphs. In 2001, an American couple had a wedding inside an underwater vessel that floated next to the Titanic deck. The profit was growing, customers were coming, and everything was fine, not counting the Titanic itself. The more tourists came down to the ship, the more damaged it got. People wanted not only to see, but also to touch the wreckage. The bathyscaphs could accidentally hit the ship and break apart its parts. The churning of the water caused by boat propellers could also damage the old ship. During one expedition, a bathyscaph crashed into the Titanic, but those who did it kept silent about this incident. In addition, the seabed where the ship lies is littered with garbage. Bottles, chains, weights, nets that people left during rescue operations and tourism. More than 100 years after the tragedy, the Titanic has finally received UNESCO protection. This means that many countries have received the right to prohibit going down to the Titanic, taking artifacts from there and selling them. The saddest thing is that this hype around the Titanic led to another tragedy. In 2023, Ocean Gate Expeditions conducted a tour on a submarine with 5 people. This was the famous Titan bathyscaph you've probably heard about. So, the Titan began its dive to the Titanic, and after 1 hour and 45 minutes, communication with the bathyscaph was lost. Something broke in the boat, depressurization started, and in a split second, the huge water pressure crushed the Titan. Despite the danger of such a dive, there are many people who want to go on an expedition to the Titanic to see the ship with their own eyes. They're not even deterred by the price of such a tour, which has increased by several times. But for those who don't have several $100,000, oceanographers and divers have created a digital copy of the sunken Titanic. Using a computer, you can visit the ship, walk through its halls, cabins, and deck. The copy has preserved some parts of the ship which don't exist anymore. For example, the famous railings on the ship's bow where Leonardo DiCaprio hugged Kate Winslet have recently collapsed. And you can also visit museums dedicated to the Titanic. There, you'll see various photos, elements of the ship, personal belongings of passengers, and many other artifacts. Anyway, if you have a lot of money and you still want to go down to the Titanic, think twice. And in general, ordinary scuba diving is a rather dangerous thing. These are the problems it can cause. When you dive underwater without preparation and come up too fast, you're likely to encounter decompression sickness, which is also called the bends. Due to the rapid decrease in the pressure that surrounds you, nitrogen bubbles move through the body and might cause paralysis, severe discomfort, spinal cord damage, and many other troubles. Wait a minute, what are nitrogen bubbles doing in your body anyway? Your cylinders contain compressed gas that consists of nitrogen and oxygen. And when you inhale this substance and the pressure around you sharply decreases, nitrogen accumulates in bubbles. According to Henry's law, the solubility of gases in a liquid is directly proportional to the external pressure. The liquid is flowing in your veins and arteries, and the external pressure is tons of seawater around you. Any change in your body pressure can also cause loss of consciousness, and underwater depths are not the best place to faint. Check out on YouTube what happens to people who don't adhere to safety regulations and experience the bends. You'll see that this is a rather unpleasant feeling. What if you get a bad instructor, or you panic and start rising too fast? Or the depth might turn out greater than you expected. Of course, when you're inside a bathyscaphe, looking at the Titanic through the window, you feel much more comfortable. But if you're going to scuba dive to big depths, good preparation is vital for you. In 1998, a diver picked up a strange sonar blip next to the wreck of the Titanic. This blip bugged scientists for over 20 years. The sonar system was clearly showing some huge object was hiding next to the most famous shipwreck in history. The scientists couldn't decide if it was coming from another shipwreck, some sort of a geological feature, or something else they didn't even expect to find there. The mystery was finally solved only in 2022. Paul Henry Nargeolet, the diver who first discovered the blip, teamed up with other researchers and went on a new expedition. They found a whole deep-sea reef made up of various volcanic formations and packed with marine life 9,514 feet under the surface. It turned out the reef was the source of the mysterious blip the sonar had detected. They found sponges, corals, fish, lobsters, and other creatures on top of the basalt ridge. The team made a lot of pictures, videos, and took water samples to study later. They're using computer models to figure out how all the animals and plants found there survive in the deep sea. This can help scientists solve the old mystery of how sponges and corals can spread out across the ocean. These creatures need something solid to hold on to as they grow and multiply. But they also survive in muddy places where it's hard to find these solid surfaces, and it's important for scientists to understand what helps them do it. All of this research is part of a bigger project to see how fragile underwater worlds might change or survive in the future. There's another mystery near the Titanic that Nargeolet wants to explore in the future. He noticed another blip between the Titanic and a newly discovered reef a long time ago. Nargeolet thinks this new mystery object might be even bigger than the reef. The Titanic is lying on the ocean floor in two big pieces pointing in different directions. After it had sunk, the boilers, which show where it went down, were found about 600 feet east of the back end of the ship. The bow of the Titanic remained intact when it hit the seabed, but the stern was completely mangled because of the implosions it went through during the descent. The air trapped within the structure just couldn't handle the increasing pressure of the water deep down. Some people who survived the famous shipwreck mentioned that they had seen the ship break in half as it was sinking. At first, no one believed them. But now we know that the Titanic really did split apart between its second and third funnels as it was going down into the water. It took the most famous ship in history 2 hours and 40 minutes to submerge completely. The collision let water flood 6 out of 16 watertight compartments. As the water gushed into the starboard side, the ship started to tilt down in the front and a bit to the right. By midnight, the damaged compartments were spilling water into others. Water started flooding through anchor chain holes, and by 2 a.m., the bow was sinking and the stern's propellers were lifted out of the water. The ship kept flooding until the moment the bow went under the water and the stern went up at a steep angle of almost 45 degrees. The weight of those massive propellers stressed the ship's midsection. The steel just couldn't handle it and failed. Survivors described that moment as some loud noise, like breaking china. That was the Titanic's upper structure giving in. By 12 past 2 a.m., the bow and stern were only connected by the inner bottom structure. Minutes later, the bow, weighing around 16,000 tons, broke loose from the stern. The stern rose sharply to an almost vertical position and started sinking slowly. By 2:20, it disappeared underwater. During the descent, the big funnels were torn off, dragging along cables and other parts of the ship's deck. The ship's front mast also broke and fell, smashing onto the bridge area. The wheelhouse where the captain steered the ship was probably destroyed when the mast came crashing down. The bow was cruising down at about 23 miles per hour and had hit the ocean floor almost half an hour before the stern. The hit was so hard that it bent and broke parts of the ship even more. The decks at the back of the bow collapsed on top of each other. The area around the bridge where the ship was controlled looks especially damaged, almost like a giant fist had squashed it. The roof and sides of the officers' quarters and the gym were pushed in, and railings were bent outwards. Some experts think that when the bow suddenly stopped sinking, a powerful blast of water caused by the sudden halt smashed down onto the wreck. It caused even more damage, but you can't see the damage from when the Titanic hit the iceberg anymore because it's buried under the mud. If you want to go check it out yourself, you must know that the waters around the Titanic are still really, really dangerous. First off, the icebergs are still wild in the area. In 2019, a total of 1,515 icebergs floated far enough south to get into the paths where ships travel across the Atlantic Ocean between March and August. Second, sunlight can only reach about 3,300 feet below the surface, and beyond that, it's completely dark. The area where the Titanic lies is called the Midnight Zone because there's no light at all. When scientists go down to explore the Titanic, they spend over 2 hours descending through pitch-black water before the ocean floor suddenly appears under the lights of their submersible. Seeing anything down there is tough because the submersible's lights only light up a few feet ahead, so it's easy to get lost. To help find their way, explorers use detailed maps of the Titanic wreck site, built over many years, and special tools like accelerometers and gyroscopes to track the ship's position and orientation. Even with all this technology, it's still really hard to find your way down there. Plus, the deeper you go in the ocean, the more pressure there is from the water all around. At the bottom of the ocean where the Titanic rests, the pressure is about 390 times higher than what we feel at the surface. Because of this, subs need to have really thick walls to survive these extreme conditions and keep the people inside safe. The currents down there aren't as powerful as on the surface, but sometimes so-called benthic storms can create powerful underwater currents that can sweep things away from the ocean floor. The Titanic is affected by them. The currents near it mostly flow from east to west and from northwest to southwest, but they can change direction a lot, especially around the bow section of the wreck. Many experts think that over time, these currents will move enough sand and mud to cover the Titanic wreck with layers of sediment. After more than 100 years underwater, the Titanic slowly started to break down. Tiny microbes have been eating away the metal over the years. This created rusty icicle-like formations called rusticles. These rusticles are making the ship fall apart even faster, especially on the back part. Scientists believe this wreck is breaking down 40 years faster than the front. The wreck is slowly collapsing bit by bit every year, but as long as no one touches or goes inside it, it should stay mostly intact for now. And finally, scientists have found evidence that huge landslides happened around the Titanic wreck long ago. These landslides sent tons of sediment sliding down from the nearby continental slope. They think the last big landslide like this happened tens of thousands of years ago and left layers of sediment up to 328 feet thick. But don't worry, these events are super rare.
The unsinkable Titanic didn't go down peacefully, which made finding its final resting place all the more difficult. The world-famous RMS Titanic sank in 1912, but was only discovered in 1985 on a secret mission. Although people back in the early 1900s had the approximate location of where the Titanic was, they didn't have the right technology to find it. As it went under, the ship sent several CQD signals, standing for Come Quickly, Distress, to a nearby ship named Carpathia. Come at once, we have struck a berg. It's a CQD, old man, were some of the final words transmitted from the Marconi wireless on the ship. These Morse code messages were also what made the first research missions to the wreck possible. RMS Carpathia found the lifeboats filled with Titanic survivors, but the world also desperately wanted to see what became of the famous liner. Fast forward to 1953. That's when the first serious attempt to find the Titanic wreck happened. A man named Risdon Beasley tried using a loud eruptive device to locate the ship. It sounds weird, but there's science to back it up. When dynamite goes off, the waves from the detonation hit the bottom of the ocean floor. With the help of sonars, scientists would be able to locate if there was anything solid at the bottom of the ocean. But Beasley had no luck. Another 20 years would pass before oceanographer Robert Ballard would make his attempt to locate the Titanic. Ballard had a bit more luck than Beasley. Over the previous years, underwater technology had gotten more funding and so worked much better. He tried it the first time in 1977. Ballard partnered with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution on a mission to map the ocean floor. While the institute hired him to test out their new mapping technology, Ballard's intention was to go a little further and find the Titanic wreck. In the middle of this new technological ship, there was a hole that allowed for a long pipe to be extended into the water just above the ocean floor. Attached to the end of this pipe, Ballard installed a pod with sonars and cameras. They thought they were in for something big, and so they took the ship to sea to run some tests. That's when, on a trial run, adversity struck. The drill pipe broke, sending all of their expensive material to the bottom of the ocean floor, just like the Titanic. When Ballard failed, another important character came into this story, a man named Jack Grimm, an eccentric oil tycoon. Grimm had become famous for trying to find things such as Noah's Ark, the Loch Ness Monster, and Bigfoot. He also tried to prove the hollow Earth theory that says that the interior of Earth is entirely hollow and hosts underground cities and nations. His search consisted of trying to find a large hole on the North Pole and thus venturing inside the hollow Earth. After his attempts failed, he set his eyes on the jewel liner that had sunk, the RMS Titanic. Grimm had the money, but he didn't have the know-how. So, as a billionaire, he made a big donation to Columbia University and asked in return to use some of their equipment. He hired a team of highly qualified scientists to help operate the machinery. Here's where it gets a little strange. Jack Grimm was a believer in folklore and non-conventional ways of doing things. So he brought a monkey on board and surprised the research team. This monkey, called Titan, was believed to point to a map and locate lost things. In this case, the Titanic. The scientists went crazy when the monkey appeared and told Grimm it was either them or the monkey. This expedition left Florida without Titan. Yes, there would be no monkey business. They set the course to the exact location of Titanic's last distress signal. They arrived, examined every inch of the ocean floor, but still found nothing. Grimm's first expedition lasted 3 weeks, but unfortunately, they found absolutely nothing. They tried a particularly good search method known as mowing the lawn, where they mimic such movements to map every inch of a larger area around Titanic's distress coordinates. The reasons for failure were important defects in the equipment and terrible weather. That's when that prior searcher of the lost Titanic came back into the picture, Robert Ballard. He didn't have the millions Jack Grimm had, but he had one thing going for him. The marine geologist was working closely with the U.S. Navy to locate 2 nuclear submarines which had sunk in the 1960s. Ballard himself says he was living two lives, one as a researcher and the other as a Navy intelligence officer. The deal was simple. He'd have a green light to search for the Titanic after he found the two missing submarines. To find Thresher and Scorpion, he used an unmanned submarine vehicle called Argo. Argo was like a little snow sled. It was attached to a bigger ship that sailed above the water. Argo was connected to the ship by a long cable, and it was piloted by a team on board. The sled had sonars and cameras that provided real-time imaging of the ocean floor, so it was a real advancement on other attempts. After much thinking, he had a eureka moment. He supposed the force of the wreck should have left a comet trail that led back to the ship. While searching for the Titanic, most people had tried to find the ship itself. But until then, it had been trying to find a needle in a haystack. That's why Ballard's logic was so brilliant. He needed to invert the order. He had another obstacle on his hands: time. He could only look for the ship after finding the lost subs. And by the time that happened, he had 12 days left. He teamed up with another scientist, and they applied the mowing the lawn method to map the ocean bed. Another important piece of information that most researchers left out was that there was a sea current moving south on the day of the disaster. This meant that the debris field should be south of the distress signal coordinates. To save time and resources, he would do a quick reconnaissance of the ocean floor, spacing lines more than 3 miles apart to look for debris fields. He also relied more on the camera visuals than on the sonar signals. His team took turns piloting Argo and watching the video. Days rolled by, with nothing but the empty ocean floor showing up, until the rocks they were used to seeing started to look like man-made debris. Suddenly, there it was, the Titanic's boiler. Ballard was right. The debris field would take them back to the ship. After 73 years of searching, they had finally found the Titanic wreck.
We know Titanic from so many stories, even a movie, but now we have its first full-sized digital scan. And nope, it's not like those models from before, where we mostly imagined what the ship was supposed to be like. This time we got a real digital scan. A team of experts really mapped the deep-sea floor around the Titanic together with the ship itself. We basically got a 3D view of the entire wreck, which is like going deep down beneath the ocean's surface and seeing Titanic as if all the water has been drained away. So, the story of the wreck started in 1985, 73 years after the Titanic went down. The explorer named Robert Ballard stumbled upon it somewhere between two submarines that also went down in that area. He was actually on a different task back then, so he didn't even have time to explore the ship properly. But as he was searching for the submarines, he realized how ocean currents affect sinking debris. He noticed the heaviest object sank quickly and left a trail of debris behind, the trail that followed the currents. Using this knowledge, Ballard made a hypothesis the Titanic had broken in two and left a debris trail as it sank. Before he found the wreck, everyone thought the ship just went down in one piece after hitting an iceberg. So everyone knew where the ship was so the adventure could start, or not. It was hard to explore it. The ship is enormous, and the dark depths of the ocean make it really difficult to capture its whole body in one go. So we mostly relied on glimpses of the decaying ship, and had to settle with teasing scattered parts of the whole picture and filling it up with speculations and stories. But in the summer of 2022, we finally got something different. A team of experts from Magellan Loaded, a company specializing in mapping the deep sea, teamed up with Atlantic Productions, who were making a documentary about the project. They embarked on a mission to capture the complete view of the Titanic. They used submersibles. Those are vehicles that go underwater, remotely controlled by a team of skilled explorers. These submersibles dove deep into the ocean. It wasn't an easy job. They spent over 200 hours collecting information about the entire length and breadth of the wreck. It was like a real-life treasure hunt. But instead of finding gold and jewels, they took something even more precious. Over 700,000 images of the Titanic from every angle possible. Yup, they took photos of every tiny part of the ship, even the not-so-interesting bits most of us would usually skip. Even mapping the muddy parts was an important part. because it helped fill in the gaps between the more exciting things they discovered. And this was a way for all of us to finally get a detailed 3D reconstruction. Even though it's been more than 100 years, you can still recognize the bow of the Titanic, covered in rust that hangs down like stalactites. On top of the bow is the boat deck, where a big hole gives us a glimpse into the empty space where the grand staircase once stood, like a window into the ship's glamorous past. Its stern is now a wild mess of twisted metal. As the Titanic went down, this part collapsed and spiraled into the seabed. The bow and the stern ended up separated by about 2,600 feet. There's a vast field of debris surrounding this giant, stuck on the seafloor. This debris is like a scattered treasure trove, full of intricate metalwork from the ship, statues, and even unopened champagne bottles. There are also personal belongings that went down together with the ship, like dozens of shoes resting across the seafloor. It was a tough task to do, go down and take all those pictures. It may not sound that hard at first, considering it was the vehicle that really immersed itself into such deep parts of the ocean, not the people. But studying the ocean is hard. We haven't explored, mapped, or even seen over 80% of it. The conditions are harsh, and the pressure becomes more intense the deeper you go. And their vehicle had to dive down to nearly 13,120 feet below the surface. That's like 12 Eiffel Towers stacked on top of each other. Plus, you have strong currents in that area, so it was probably like trying to navigate through a watery maze. And submersibles weren't supposed to touch anything. Even the slightest wrong step can damage the wreck that was already so fragile. It seems like the Titanic is frozen in time, so it will always be there waiting for us. But in reality, it's slowly disappearing. It's pretty obvious that the ocean water ruined it considering how long it has been down there. But it's not just that. The wreck itself has become a home for a specific type of bacteria Halomonas titanicae that even got named after the famous ship. These bacteria have a special ability. They can survive inside rusty formations known as rusticles. They kind of look like icicles, those spikes of ice that form when water falls from something and freezes. These bacteria have a taste for iron, which is abundant in the ship's hull. For them, it's like a real buffet down there. And as time goes by, these bacteria will keep eating away at the iron in the ship, bit by bit, until one day the feast comes to an end and the whole ship is gone. It's like a slow but steady recycling process. So this 3D model we got because of the hardworking team and technology comes at the best time because we never know how much time we have left with exploring the famous wreck. This time we might even understand the collision with the iceberg better. You know how movies always show the Titanic hitting the iceberg on its right side? Well, we can't even be certain about that. The scans could help us figure out if the ship actually grounded on the iceberg, like getting stuck on it. We can study the stern and analyze how the Titanic struck the seafloor. That will also help us understand what really happened during the sinking. Maybe we'll get a chance to discover if there was really a strong fire that sealed the fate of the Titanic. One theory says that the coal fire had been raging for a whole 3 weeks before the ship even took its first and last trip. And this could have made its hull weaker, which means most of the work was done. The iceberg just delivered the final blow. If there even was an iceberg, as some people wonder. There's an alternative theory they suggested where the Titanic may have actually hit a hidden mass of pack ice instead of a typical iceberg. Pack ice is made up of large sheets of ice that float near the ocean's surface and can be difficult to spot. They believe this pack ice might have drifted into the Atlantic from the Arctic Ocean. According to one professional mariner, Captain L.M. Collins, that stands up with that idea. If the Titanic had struck a regular iceberg, the ship would have sunk much more quickly than it did. And since the Titanic managed to stay on the surface for a relatively long period of time, less than 3 hours, maybe this was a different type of collision. The mariner also said there are differences in what people said they saw when the Titanic sank. He thinks these differences might be because of optical illusions. In this case, when people were looking at the ocean that night, the way the light was reflecting and the conditions at sea might have made things appear closer or distorted. So when they saw something in the water, it might not have been exactly what they thought it was. Whether it was an iceberg or something else. Binoculars might have helped the crew members to spot the potential danger, but unfortunately, they didn't have any. It appears they were locked inside a cabinet, and no one knew where the key was.
Back when it was built, The Titanic was one of the largest and most luxurious passenger ships, with high-class features like a grand staircase, a swimming pool, and a gymnasium. People thought it to be unsinkable because of its advanced safety devices. Its tragic sinking on its maiden voyage in 1912 proved it wasn't at all the case. It wasn't until 1985 that the Titanic's wreck was finally rediscovered using state-of-the-art sonar technology. Ever since, thousands of items have been recovered from the Titanic, many of them being put on display or sold for auction. Things like jewelry, a life jacket, a menu from the ship's restaurant, or even a sample square of carpet from the first-class stateroom have all baffled the public and told stories of the many on-board people. Scientists have even tried to come up with strategies to get the Titanic back up. Not because they want to put it up for display, but so it can be properly studied, and more importantly, to stop it from getting more and more damaged at the bottom of the ocean. Some have suggested filling the wreck with ping pong balls to make it float, while others even considered injecting it with 198,000 tons of Vaseline. Another creative solution was proposed, the idea of using a giant claw or scoop to lift the Titanic. Nobody came up with this device. Using 500,000 tons of liquid nitrogen to trap it in an iceberg that would float to the surface was also considered, but all these potential strategies had to be eventually let go, since the Titanic is way too fragile to ever be recovered. As the Titanic's iconic bow railings are in danger of collapsing, metal-eating bacteria continue to chew away at the ocean liner's wreckage. An undersea exploration company plans to gather data about the ship's deterioration in annual expeditions. They hope this will help them learn more about the Titanic, and also more about the ecosystem that shipwrecks create. The over 100-year-old ocean liner is also being damaged by deep-sea currents daily. Some experts predict that the ship could disappear in a few decades due to holes in its hull. The deck that passengers crowded on as the ship sank has caved in. The gymnasium near the grand staircase has also fallen in, and a 2019 expedition found that the captain's bathtub, which became visible after the outer wall of the captain's cabin fell away, is no longer there. Those annual expeditions also gather data about the creatures living at the site, including crabs and corals. Surprisingly, many species have only been seen there at the Titanic wreck, so scientists are curious to find out more about them. The most famous out of all these creatures is the Halomonas titanicae. It's a bacteria, and it was discovered on the wreckage of the Titanic. What's interesting about this creature is that it's able to thrive in extremely salty environments. It's also been resistant to several antibiotics, unlike other types of bacteria. It's probably because of this superbacteria that the deterioration of the ship's iron hull happened so fast. The expedition will also look at the debris field and its artifacts. On the site, there are still traces of little personal items like clothes and luggage. One of the most interesting stories about Titanic artifacts is that of the passengers' shoes. Most of the Titanic items that have been lost at sea deteriorated or disappeared completely. But not the shoes. They seem to be able to resist the harsh conditions. On top of that, the leather in most shoes is perfectly preserved, probably because of tannin, a substance used in the tanning process of leather. It helped the shoes resist the damaging bacteria found underwater. All this exploring might have gotten you all excited. If that's the case, I have some good news to share. You might even be able to join the expeditions. To personally explore the Titanic, you have to plan ahead and apply to be a mission specialist with OceanGate, the company responsible for the journey. However, this experience does come with a high price tag of $250,000. Despite the cost, this once-in-a-lifetime experience is in high demand because of the limited spots available. If you can afford the exploration, you will have the chance to collaborate with renowned specialists in marine biology, oceanography, the Titanic, DNA, and the deep ocean. Accommodations and meals on the dive support vessel are also included, as well as training and guidance from specialists before and during the mission. Lastly, you don't even need to bring your own gear, as the expedition equipment is included as well. Sure, ships have evolved and modernized over the years, and these days we have technology that is way better than that available on the Titanic. But this ship remains an amazing piece of history because of its many unusual features, like the fact that the Titanic's whistle was loud enough to be heard over 11 miles away, or the fact that the ship's hull was painted with a special mixture of red lead and linseed oil, which was believed to be effective in preventing the growth of seaweed and other marine organisms. However, despite popular belief, the ship's iconic fourth smokestack was not functional and was only used for ventilation and aesthetics. Probably one of its biggest flaws was its number of lifeboats. Despite its size and luxury, the Titanic only had 20 lifeboats on board, which were not enough to save all of its passengers and crew once it hit the iceberg. The Titanic may be the most famous shipwreck, but it's not the only one. The fleet of Kublai Khan tells a similar story. This one was a large naval force commissioned by the Mongol ruler Kublai Khan in the 13th century. The fleet was intended to travel to Japan and establish the Mongols as powerful rulers in the region. However, in 1281, the fleet was supposedly caught in bad weather and was seriously damaged, with many ships being destroyed. Legend has it that the fleet was torn down by a massive typhoon that came to be known as the kamikaze, or divine wind. This strong storm was believed to have been sent by the higher spirits to protect Japan from the Mongols. The truth about its disappearance remains a mystery to this day. However, the wreckage of the fleet, or parts of it, appears to have been discovered in the 1980s by Asian archaeologists. They dug across the site and studied the remains of the ships at a location near Imari Bay. The shipwreck is, to this day, considered to be an important archaeological discovery. That's because it informed us how well prepared the Mongols were back in the day in terms of their ships. Another tragic story is that of the RMS Empress of Ireland. This was a British passenger ship that operated until May of 1914. This is when the ship was sailing from Quebec City to Liverpool, but it ran into the Norwegian collier SS Storstad in the fog off the coast of Rimouski, Quebec. The collision caused a large hole in the side of the Empress of Ireland, and the ship began to quickly take on water and sink. The crew and passengers were caught off guard, and many were unable to evacuate in time. In total, 1,012 people were lost in the disaster, making it one of the worst maritime collisions in Canadian history. Rescue efforts were hampered by poor visibility and the fact that many of the lifeboats were damaged or unusable. Only 465 people survived the sinking, and many of them were rescued by the Storstad, which had remained in the area despite its damage. The sinking of the Empress of Ireland was a national tragedy in Canada, and it led to changes in maritime safety regulations and the establishment of a Coast Guard. The ship still lies at the bottom of the St. Lawrence River, where it has become a popular dive site for enthusiasts.